Our second day in St. Petersburg, Russia, starts off with a riverboat cruise. We catch our boat at the rear entrance of the Admiralty building. Our guide for the riverboat cruise is Alexander, who gives us a very informative narrative of the interesting sights that we pass along the way.
And now we are sailing under the Troitsky Bridge. There's an urban legend that this bridge was designed by the engineer Eiffel to build the Eiffel Tower. But this is like an urban legend because he was only a shareholder of the company which designed this bridge. And this was the French company, Baltic. Those of you who have been to Paris might notice the similarity in this bridge with the bridge of Alexander III in Paris. The word Soviet means counsel or advice in Russian, and it has nothing to do with communists directly, because this was basically the word for any council, and the Soviets were just people's councils, and the Soviet Union literally means the Union of People's Councils. Now we're approaching the area which is probably the most similar to Amsterdam.
Standing on each side of the river, in front of the old stock exchange, are two rostral columns. A rostral column is a victory column, originating in the Greek and Roman era to commemorate naval victories, on which the prows of captured ships were displayed. Seated marble statues at the base of each column represent Russia's 4 major rivers. That day there was an air show, and we caught a glimpse of a Russian fighter jet flying over the city. Our tour ends with us passing in front of the impressive palace, now museum, the Hermitage, our next destination. The expansive complex consists of 6 historic buildings, including the Winter Palace, the former residence of many Russian emperors. This is the famous peacock clock, produced by the British jeweler James Cox. It was a gift for Catherine the Great by Gregory Potemkin in 1781. It has recently been restored and now operates only once a week, Wednesdays at 1 o'clock. Since it wasn't a Wednesday, we didn't get to see it in operation, but this is what it would look like. This table had some of the finest mosaics we've seen, some of them no bigger than a pinhead. We also saw some wonderful malachite vases and columns. You'd expect them to be carved from solid stone, but they're actually pieces of veneer over a plaster form. Elena points out one of her favorite pictures. It depicts the hunted animals getting revenge on the hunters. Just outside the Hermitage's winter palace is Palace Square, and at its center is the Alexander Column. At 83.5 feet, it's the tallest solid granite column in the world. Here we decided to take some pictures in front of the Winter Palace's main gates. On our way to the bus, we passed by these 10 giant statues of Atlantis, holding up one of the other entrances to the Hermitage. Our next stop is the impressive Church of Our Savior on Spilt Blood. The blood the church's name is referring to is that of Alexander II. The church was built on the location of his assassination, where a bomb was thrown at his royal carriage. After the Russian Revolution, the church was heavily looted and closed in 1932. During World War II, the church was used as a warehouse, but after 30 years of restoration, It was reopened in 1997. According to the restorers, the church contains over 7,500 square meters of mosaic tile, more than any other church in the world.
Расцветали яблони и груши, поплыли туманы над рекой. Выходила на берег Катюша, на высокий берег, на крутой. Выходила, песню заводила про степного сизого орла, про того, которого любила, про того, чьи письма берегла.
Ой, ты песня, песенка девичья, ты лети за ясным солнцем вслед. И бойцу на дальнем пограничье от Катюши передай привет. И бойцу на дальнем пограничье от Катюши передай привет. Пусть он вспомнит девушку простую, пусть услышит, как она поет. Пусть он землю бережет родную, а любовь Катюша сбережет.
Today, lunch is at a pie shop, with a local specialty of a meat pie encased in a slightly sweet bread, with dessert consisting of the same type of pie with a tart berry filling. Our next stop is Yusupov Palace. It is unique in that it gives an accurate representation of the Russian nobility's lifestyle up through the early 1900s. Something that's quite unique for this palace, and considered a great luxury, is that it has its own home theater. One macabre feature of this palace is that deep in its basement is the room where Grigory Rasputin was killed, and has been set up as a reenactment of that night. Our last stop in St. Petersburg is St. Isaac's Cathedral.
Before we got in, I'm sure you saw the columns at the entrance, and you remember that they are very heavy. Each column weighs 116 tons, and to raise them, they had to build a huge scaffolding. Many buildings in St. Petersburg stand on the pylons. To build this church, before they started to build it, they drove 30,000 pilings into the ground to strengthen it. And it took them 3 years to build the foundation of this church. Originally, the walls and the ceiling in this church were all decorated with the paintings. But at that time it was very humid in here, as this church stands relatively close to the river, and the paints started to peel off. That's why they decided to replace them with the exact mosaic copies. And I will tell, they started to do that, but they had to stop because the revolution happened. It was really time-consuming. Sometimes it took them 6 months to produce 1 square meter of mosaics for this church in Baltic.
While boarding the ship, Mom had an unfortunate accident. She tripped and fell onto the metal rungs of the gangway. Being banged up pretty good, she was checked out by the ship's doctor and pronounced well enough to travel. After getting her settled in her room, we could only wait until tomorrow morning to see how she felt. As we leave Russia, we pass through the St. Petersburg floodgates. The city has a history of flooding due to storm surges coming in from the Baltic. So during these storms, these giant gates can be closed. Tomorrow our cruise takes us to Estonia.